Hey guys, we're going to talk about David Sinclair today. So let's get going. I'll just share my screen. This is the sort of stuff that David actually does recommend to people. Things like metformin, aspirin, B, vitamin D3, vitamin K2, and also coenzyme Q10. He sort of recommends. I think it says also it's got carnitine or in it as well. So these are the sort of supplements plus resveratrol and NMN. I usually don't pronounce that correctly, according to some people. Anyway, so yes, so that's basically what he takes. Obviously, metformin is used by people with diabetes to lower blood sugars. And he recognizes that blood sugar is a problem. So why wouldn't you recommend a low carbohydrate diet rather than metformin as an option? Is beyond me. I know that he does time restricted feeding. His father does time restricted feeding. He does fasting mimicking diets. So he does a whole lot of other things. It's not just the stuff that he takes, the supplements that he promotes and sells, but he does a whole lot of other things that, what we call healthy user bias. We know that if you fast and time restricted, he doesn't have breakfast. We know that time restricted feeding and reduction of food intake. So a lot of longevity populations tend to, like the Japanese, the Okinawans, eat until they're 80% full. They tend to undereat. So that's another factor, a confounding variable. So there's a lot of things in there that are at play. So there's a lot of assertions that are made and stuff like that. But at the same time, there's a lot of other components. Now, obviously, there's some research that actually shows that a combination of vitamin D3 and menaquinone 4, which, pretty much these are, either from the sun or animal sources, these are the sort of vitamins that you're going to get. So pretty much the combination does show an improvement in the telomerase, so your telomeres, So that's another sort of longevity element there that you can get from animal foods. So he's supplementing both these. I do supplement in winter, obviously, because I'm away from the tropical zones where we evolved as a species, and so I tend to do that. We don't consume as much foods nowadays that our ancestors did that provided us with more vitamin D. Neither do we go out and ground ourselves or half naked in the moving around to get good levels of vitamin D. We work indoors and stuff like that. So it is a problem. And so even though I usually try and get as much sun exposure because there is cholesterol sulfate and many other things, which is a water-soluble form of cholesterol that has a number of benefits in the body, which I'll go on. That'll be for another video. But at the same time, these sort of things can be had, K2, yes, it's very useful. It can be had from animal foods. There's plenty in animal foods. He just needs to eat more animal foods or promotes animal foods, but he doesn't. So then the CoQ10, again, in animal foods, plenty of it. And if you really want a high dose, eat hearts. There's plenty of that in hearts. So, when I see aspirin, the person that I think is Ray Pete, the same sort of bullshit, COX inhibitors and stuff like that. And that's all reductionist research. So immediately I go, oh, freaking hell, David, really? Aspirin? Really, mate? So yeah. And then metformin, just go low carb. You don't need to consume metformin. Diabetic people are put on it and it's one of the ones that has least problems in terms of deranging the physiology, but it does have side effects. So you got to put people on a number of. It has a number of causes a number of deficiencies, vitamin deficiencies in particular. So certain physicians are well aware of this, others are not, which is a problem. So, and David shouldn't be promoting something like that when, first of all, he's not a physician. He's a scientist that's doing research, reductionist research primarily, and he shouldn't be basically recommending things that he, doesn't know what the other person is doing dietary wise, and whether they're getting enough of certain nutrients in the diet. And if you're taking metformin at the same time, could be causing an underlying issue in that regard. So, I mean, this is the sort of the Mayo Clinic. They cover a lot of metformin and, the sort of medical problems and stuff like that, liver disease, anemia, B12 deficiency, kidney disease, there's a whole range of, depends on the person as well, how things will react, other side effects, well-known side effects, like stomach issues and let's say digestive issues, a whole lot of related stuff, lower back, side pain, anxiety, blurred vision, coma, not a good thing. So you definitely don't want to take a lot of that sort of stuff. So there's probably some genetics here. People can react there's sort of rare things, drowsiness, lack of or loss of strength, more common, acid or sour stomach. So acid, probably causing acid reflux, deranging that, belching, bloated, excess air, gas, stomach, intestines, full feeling, heartburn, indigestion. So, it's got a lot of unpleasant side effects and sort of other things like joint pain, rash, sneezing, swollen joints. So there can be issues, and these are just those general, but there are actually a number of severe ones. Even the ACP diabetes, they've identified for their clients metformin associated with B vitamin deficiencies. The big ones are things like folate, B12, and B6 and riboflavin. All these are also involved in methylation. The primary methylation pathway to deal with homocysteine as well. Not a good thing, So we know that if you lower these things or not enough of these in the system, that also causes a lot of neuropsychological status. We know it's not really good, for the brain. Okay, so these are the sort of things. This is the UK government, metformin and reduced vitamin B12 levels, new advice for monitoring patients at risk, So we are therefore advising checking B12 serum levels in patients being treated with metformin who have symptoms suggestive of vitamin B12 deficiency. See, he's recommending something without knowing exactly what the people, because it's a medicine. We're not talking about something that he's actually encouraging people to go and ask their doctor to prescribe them something that could potentially cause them deficiency. He doesn't know what diet they're on, what nutrients they're getting in. I think it's quite irresponsible on his part. Thiamine deficiency as well, since thiamine deficiency is associated with lactic, there's two enzymes that basically are involved in, because there's one enzyme for fatty acids and proteins, and there's two enzymes for basically glucose. So, if this isn't working, you're not going to be pushing through the TCA cycle, so pyruvate dehydrogenase into the TCA cycle, or Krebs cycle, citric cycle, whatever you want to call it. I usually call it the Krebs cycle, as a recognition for that person. But anyway, People call it a whole lot of different things. So that's lactate. It's called lactate, not lactic acid. Anyway, God, Bart heard that, he'd go ballistic. Anyway, this observation may suggest an alternative mechanism to mitochondrial complex 1 inhibition for metformin. So, that's not a good thing. We need complex 1 to be working well, not to be inhibited. We need to be pushing that stuff through. And we need to be taking some taurine to, make sure that we lower the reactive oxygen species coming through metabolism. Anyway, eat your meat for that. So, yeah, that is metformin may reduce thiamine absorption, leading to a reduced thiamine levels. Not a bloody good thing, because there's a whole lot of health issues associated, which we're not going to go into because that's going to take too damn long. So these are the sort of things that I have concerns with, and then aspirin, can cause bleeding. There's a lot of research that shows that, that the early research that was done by industry was questionable. And, there are other things that can actually reduce, your blood being too sticky or things of that sort, and anti-clotting effects, which are, in species appropriate foods, there are those compounds that actually have similar effects. So why take something that actually has a side effect of causing potential bleeding? And we know that long-term use predisposes a number of people. It varies. We think it's genetics, but we're not sure. We haven't identified exactly the groups. It just seems that people that prolonged, there may be some people that are more susceptible, but it seems that it is a problem and it's been identified in the literature. So why would you recommend it? And he's not a physician, he's a scientist. He shouldn't be recommending either one of these two. Okay? I've got no problems with these, where I'm just commenting that you can get some of this sort of stuff from natural sources. You don't have to waste your money. That's all I'm commenting on these things, because these are not contraindicated. These are in foods. They're not going to cause you any problems. These two are not in foods. They're not food. They're medicine, in a sense. And he shouldn't be recommending meds. Nobody. I shouldn't, Bart shouldn't, nobody. And we don't, because it's not our place. We're not physicians to recommend that sort of stuff, and the side effects potentially and stuff like that, and to monitor people. He's not going to monitor these people. He's telling them to take this sort of stuff. He's not going to be around to monitor them. He's not their physician. That's very irresponsible on his part in that regard. And he doesn't even, he should be putting warnings and saying, before considering these things, do consider the side effects and do speak with your physician. I take these, but you should recommend, because he takes multivitamins, he does a whole lot of things, so other people just will see this and go, okay, that's the 5-1, and then his supplement, which is, this one here, get your resveratrol and NMN, pronouncing that correctly, which is pretty much, let's go here, NAD. It's basically to increase your NAD in your system, okay? The things that actually consume NAD are sirtuins, PARPs, CD38, and CD157, okay? So that's the sort of stuff that actually has that effect. So he's recommending, this is a bit out of date as well, unfortunately. I should basically use, I should revise this, because recent research has shown a different receptor site. I've talked about it in another video. I'm not going to discuss it here, but it's coming in about here. So this supplement, rather than via the salvage pathway, which is nicotinamide, which is a metabolite of basically nice and complex in that regard. And the main part, which is nicotinic acid. That's what we call the niacin. Anyway, that's what you say. Your niacin supplements are in that form as well. Well, the ones that are the normal ones, along the other ones, which are the ones that don't give you a flush and sort of a time release and stuff like that. They are modified versions and not good for the liver. So we'd never recommend those. You should never, never, never take those ones. Otherwise, if you don't want to take this one because you flushing annoys you, go for the, I mean, you've got the, the other pathway, which is the dietary one as well, which is pretty much tryptophan. And animal foods have got quite a bit of it. So just let the body sort out the NAD. If you fix the mitochondria, you don't have to worry. The whole thing is, as your senescent cells rise, CD38 rises as a protective mechanism, as I've said, in senescent cells. To be recommending across the board to everyone, as David does, is quite irresponsible, because he's putting a number of these people at risk for cancer, potentially. That's what some research shows. So we need to be very damn careful about that sort of stuff, David. So now getting into some of this sort of stuff, just so people have got a bit of an idea, a bit of an idea about this. Just get rid of my shared sort of stuff. Anyway, so what's NAD? It's your basically, some people call it your cellular energy. Well, that's what a lot of the gurus call it. They'll say, oh, it's all your cellular energy and all that. What it is basically is an oxidation reduction type of reaction that acts. We're basically talking about enzymes. They lose or gain electrons, so they're moving them through the electron chain, in a sense. So, and what these things do, they encourage enzymatic sort of chemical reactions. Okay, so in a sense, they enable enzymes to do work. Okay, so that's why they've got the type. That's why they're called like coenzymes. Okay, so what you end up producing, through these reactions that are, biochemical reactions that are happening inside the body, you're basically your end product is ATP. Okay, so the sort of that's the key purpose in a sense. Now, NAD does. I mean, when we were looking at the salvage pathway, like NAD consuming enzymes and stuff like that, that are happening there. Should I put it on the screen? You guys, hold on. I will share that again, just so people can see what I'm talking about. Okay, just share that, Hallie. So NAD, okay. Now, you've got the sort of sirtuins. The key one is SIRT1. Actually, we don't really know about some. We know a bit about the other sirtuins, but the SIRT1 is the big one that we really know about. The other ones is a bit of speculative, whatever. So I'm not going to go into them. So that's the main one that we know really, really well. So it's sort of it responds to like your cellular, to stresses. That's the word, stresses. So when you fast, when you calorie restrict, which is, or your time restricted feeding, like I do, or you exercise, any of that sort of stuff that you do, and the longer you do it in the daytime, you sort of activate these things. So it's, helps the body for better to adapt to this sort of energy state that you're in when you're doing these sort of activities. And that's sort of limited, it's depending on your nutrition. So obviously, if you've got nutrition which is slightly higher in your your niacin and stuff like that, so you're eating pea, you're eating a bit of tuna and stuff like that, you're going to be supporting that sort of pathway. So that's good. Sort of other things that sirtuins sort of do, these proteins, they've got like a tumor suppression role. They've got when it comes to mitochondrial function, dysfunction, they play a bit of a role there to sort of improve the functioning of your mitochondria. Try and keep cells alive. So you've got all sorts of pressures and stresses and things that are happening around and all that. They're sort of involved in detoxification and DNA repair, and even with sort of insulin type secretion signaling and stuff like that. So they do have a bit of a role in the body in that regard. They do get expressed. So especially when you're stressed, you tend to use more. So you'll probably end up, I think, I do recommend to people that, if you're stressed, eat a bit more tuna, eat a bit more piggy, because you're going to get more of the stuff that you need to support the sirtuins. So is usually because your body was going to ask for more. And, so that's sort of the thinking. Even when I exercise, I actually, on the day that I'm doing my weights and stuff like that, I tend to eat piggy, quite a bit of piggy, or sometimes even tuna, depending how I feel. So, depending on how I feel on the day. Sort of the other group, which is this one here, Parps. Don't ask me with my dyslexia to pronounce the damn thing and all that. So give me a bit of a break on that, please. But it's what is it? It's the poly-ADP ribosome protein. Yep, I think that's what it is. Anyway, and it sort of is involved in DNA repair and the functioning and stuff like that. It can sort of, let's say you've got a senescent cell, it can tell it to die, if it's not able to be repaired. So it does have a lot of the gurus say it is a major longevity sort of pathway. Really? I don't know. It's never been proven. But it's good to, because it's really a downstream from NAD. So really, is it PARPs or is it, PARPs is just an enzyme that does an activity. Okay. So really, is it a longevity thing? I don't think so. Personally, I think that if your mitochondria are working well, which means that they're functioning well, and your levels of NAD are much better, then as a consequence, you've got less senescent cells. These things are, have got more NAD, going to be working better. So you got these enzymes will do more work. Obviously, if you've got less energy because you've damaged your mitochondria with deuterium, you're going to do less work. And no amount of NMN that you flush down there is going to make these produce more NAD or work any harder. It's just sort of illogical, the whole thinking in that regard. So I sort of don't buy some of this bullshit personally. And then you've got, they usually say that these ones here, certain PARPs, they they're competing with NAD. I don't see it as a competition. I just said that they're utilizing. So that's what they're doing. It's sort of these biochemical reactions. So that are actually happening to allow these things to work. But this is the one that I've talked about before, but with senescent cells, CD38. You've probably heard me, talk about it many times. And as you get older, especially in our modern day diet, the way people are eating shit constantly, it sort of tends to rise with senescent cells. So the more senescent cells actually produce more CD38. There's a couple of reasons that it actually happens. It also, anyway, let me just I'll go to that in a sec. Anyway, so and NAD will decline in a sense. So why is one going up and one going down? Really, fundamentally, at the fundamental level, is if you're destroying with high deuterium foods, which is what David actually recommends, eating carbs and taking metformin to reduce it, and then taking M&M to sort of NMN, M&M, God almighty, keep on doing that. Anyway, to increase NAD levels, that can be a problem because it's suppressing CD38, especially if you've got a lot of senescent cells, damaged cells. Not a good idea in that regard, So, and the thing that CD38 does, it actually uses a lot of NAD, so it's an NAD hog. So, in that regard, so that affects. So, but most of these people say, oh, your NAD levels decline as your CD38 goes up. My sort of view is no, your NAD declines because basically your mitochondria are not working as well. And you've got more senescent cells producing more CD38 that is using up the NAD. Okay. Now, the other thing is, CD38 is also found mostly in like immune cells. So it's involved in like a lot of immune functions around the body. So it's not basically something that we tend to view it in a reductionist way as an evil compound that should be excised out of the body. Not a good idea. So, in that way. So when we've got cellular senescence, which I've talked about before, these sort of cells are sort of aging and dying cells. They're sort of releasing a lot of inflammatory cytokines, which damages the nearby cells as well, which is not a good idea to have a lot of these. And what happens is it triggers a rise in CD38, so which tends to use NAD. But the thing why this sort of inflammation is that it's emanating from the senescent cells, those sort of damaged cells and stuff like that. We say that it's inflammation, but a senescent cell, what has happened to a senescent cell to be so reactive? Well, that cell has probably lost electrons. Earth yourself, my dears, to to add to electron donation back to those cells and shift them back away from severe senescence. But anyway, let's continue. So it will tend to see this sort of rise in that sort of thing. Now, many people will say, "Oh, that's an awful thing." It's it's really, really awful that CD38 is rising, and you've got this sort of inflammation that is actually increasing, and CD38 is obviously associated in that. And so you're criminal. You're a criminal, so you must die. So the recommendation is let's give people more NAD and stuff like that. Things people don't realize it can't. That cancer cells also release these sort of inflammatory cytokines and stuff like that, and because they release these inflammatory and these are part of the immune system, remember, and CD38 is part of that. What CD38 does is kill the buggers. So, they've actually done experiments, like in vitro experiments, where they remove all NAD and pack in the CD38, and they cause cancer death. You heard it, cancer death. So, if you've got cancer, you should not be taking any of these sort of type supplements. Okay? Should just be getting what you get from the diet. That's it. So you shouldn't be getting any more than what you're getting from the diet. You should not be supplementing these high doses of B3 in particular. But in particular, this NMN, it's one thing taking 100 units, micrograms of pretty much something like niacin, and it's another thing taking something like 1,000. Complete different kettle of fish. And it's what some of these people are doing, unfortunately, don't realize that they're suppressing this CD38, which is part of the immune system. And it's a protective mechanism against cancer, as I've said in the past. But what it does is it actually promotes cell death. That means of the cancer cells and senescent cells. So, what David is actually saying to these people is take NAD. It'll give you longevity if you take these NAD precursors. And I'm going, you've got to be very careful. If you've got severe senescence and severe mitochondrial, disease and severe like cancers and stuff like that, you definitely don't want to be taking this stuff, guys. Definitely not, because we want to kill off these buggers, and we want to restore with low deuterium approaches. We want to restore normal NAD levels and reduce CD38 in a normal way. As we clear out these nasty cells out of our system, then we want to naturally rise the NAD, not unnaturally through supplements and stuff like that, because it is a risky way of doing things, guys. I mean, and unfortunately, a lot of people out there are not aware of these risks. And so I'm trying to get across to people that if you're basically cancerous, precancerous, or have some issues like that, you should not be supplementing with NMN or NR, which is the other supplement that he also recommends as well. So that's not the sort of stuff you want. And when people say, oh, this is using that and that's using that, that's all reductionism. The body's a dynamic system. It's using a whole lot of things. If you're basically not being able to, if you're creating a lot of inflammation in your body and a lot of problems, then you're going to be activating these things to go around, the immune system, these here for your DNA repair and all this sort of stuff, doing those sort of functions and using some of this sort of stuff for those sort of purposes. But the last thing you want to do is be giving the cancer cells more of this. You got what I mean? We want to approach cancer in a very different way, or these sort of conditions by, I'll get rid of that. I think you can look at my weirdo mug. So we want to support our bodies with a species appropriate diet, so we don't become sarcopenic and all these other things. And we want to have a protocol where we're using fisetin. He does recommend fisetin. That's one positive thing. I'll give him that. He does use that on his dad and himself. So he does use senolytics. So, I'll take my hat off on that. That's one thing that he does positive. And he does believe in good sleep and stuff like that, which is good for melatonin to repair the mitochondria. So he does a number of good things. And he started doing this sort of stuff, a lot of these healthy stuff, not only at, I think, the age of 33 or 34. So he's fairly young when he started doing this, which at that stage he would have had much less mitochondrial damage, much less health problems and stuff like that. So in improving mitochondrial function by doing this sort of stuff, probably improved, healing much more faster. So he avoided a lot of problems. But if you continue, and also he does take multivitamins and all sorts of things and stuff like that. So that's a sort of way that it inhibits some of these issues of deficiency. But the problem is he's recommending stuff like these, his 5 favorites plus the other resveratrol plus, and even resveratrol has issues. There are a number of side effects and all that, but that's for another video. I'm not going to go into that at the moment because that's not the focus of this. The focus is people need to realize that through good nutrition and good strategies of dealing with the underlying problem. The underlying problem is your mitochondria not working well. Throwing more NAD in there isn't going to fix the problem, okay? Because it will have a negative effect on CD38. It won't be able to do its work properly. And these senescent and cancer cells will grab onto that NAD to use it to survive. And we don't want that. So if you've got those sort of conditions, the last thing you want to be doing is taking these sort of supplements. So if you're taking these sort of supplements, NMN, and you're in very highly senescent state or very high levels or cancer or whatever, please stop taking these supplements because they are putting your life at risk. Okay? So please stop it. We can naturally get our NAD levels up through good animal nutrition. We do not need this artificial over-exaggeration in that regard. We don't need to cause inappropriate negative effects on your CD38 levels. Where your CD38 levels are is where they should be because they have an important role with the immune system in combating senescence and cancer cells. So we need to be very careful of not sort of causing derangements in that sort of area. So, I mean, we don't need NAD precursors. If you're eating piggy and other species appropriate foods, you'll get a sufficient amount of these nutrients that your body needs to be able to function, to do its, those enzymatic reactions, those redox, biochemical reactions. You don't need to basically take these mega doses, which can have negative effects potentially. You don't know what state you are in. And most people that are middle-aged and over have got a lot of both immunosenescence. They've got a lot of cellular senescence, and some people are sort of heading, especially nowadays, they're talking about 1 in 3 having cancer in America. There's a lot of risk in the population compared to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and all that. And I think we have to be very careful the way we recommend things. My focus is in bringing the deuterium levels down. Now, you can do that naturally with a high-fat animal-based diet from, eating low deuterium fats, and over time, reducing the level of deuterium in your body, because you're going to basically, without drinking too much water as well, by hydrating with fat and getting yourself fat adapted. Or if you can't get yourself fat adapted because you've got a lot of mitochondrial damage, like somebody with cancer or somebody like that, then we take metabolic water. with taurine, because we want to, and in the evening taurine in particular, because we want to amplify melatonin to repair. We want taurine to reduce the reactive oxygen species inside the mitochondria, and also to reduce lactate. We also want to improve complex 1, and we want to improve the general electron chain by healing it, by reducing reactive oxygen species and healing any damage that is being done through metabolism, plus using the melatonin side of things, and natural melatonin. I don't like supplementing, just get good sleep by amplifying the effect by taking extra, if you need to take extra doses of taurine in the evening, like 4 or 6 grams, so be it. You know, just get some good sleep and get the melatonin to fix, lower the level of deuterium in your body with metabolic water and stuff like that, which will then help you to improve your situation. Some people may not be able to afford metabolic water. The other way is going slightly higher fat for a period of time, getting yourself more fat adapted and trying to reduce no water. Well, you may need initially a bit of water as you're struggling. Try and get something like Evian water, which is slightly lower, around the 145 parts per million. It's at least slightly less. Don't use a lot of it. Just use it for the occasional coffee and stuff like that. Try and minimize the amount of deuterium we're trying to, and avoid things like, olive oil and stuff like that, please. They're 130 parts per million. Yes, they're in the sort of semi-safe zone, but we need to go lower, and we need to go all grass-fed. That's another thing, because things that are not grass-fed and are grain finished, they tend to have a slightly higher deuterium level in the fat. They'll be in the 120 odd or stuff like that, where we want to get below 120, especially when people have got health issues. We want to be in that lower range, and usually things that are like foraging pigs will be in the 113, 115. So will butter if it's grass-fed. If it's not, it'll be higher in the 120, which is most commercial butters. We're in the 120. The pastured ones, certified pastured, that is, butter will be below 120. When it comes to also the meats, same thing with fats and salt. You need to try and source. And the other thing is try and develop a good relationship with your butcher, and get fat off them. It's cheap metabolic water, cheap energy that you can put in there to slowly dilute and reduce the amount of deuterium in your system. It's a cheaper way, because metabolic water is expensive, unfortunately. I wish it was cheaper. But sometimes doing it for 3 months at around about the 105 pp, if you've got, a lot of senescence, a lot of issues like, you don't have good energy levels, you're really like that at 105. If you've got cancer, 85 ppm is the level. Some people we don't want people buying the very low stuff and using it. And the reason for that is there are issues where, cancerous states can adjust to those sort of levels. So we want to have the option under certain circumstances to be able to use those as a lower therapeutic in a future state if some other sort of derangement happens. But that's for another video. The key thing here, the take-home message is we want to keep it clean, and I mean crystal clean when it comes to the diet, and we want to bring down the deuterium levels. A carnivore ketogenic diet is perfect for that, because it's low deuterium, and it's really what we need to aim for, which means that we need to prioritize under those circumstances the fat portion, so we can actually increase metabolic water, increase our adaptation, force us into being in a more ketotic state for most of the day, and that'll be important to allow the body to produce far more metabolic water. Sometimes, feasting and then doing like a 24-hour fast and, cycling will mean and doing that fast as a dry fast, because if you're not consuming water and you've upregulated your antidiuretic hormones and you're producing your fat adapters and you're producing metabolic water, then you can do a dry fast, which will magnify, increase by 6-fold this sort of oxidation of fatty acids, which really will mean that you'll produce even more. It'll force the body into higher ketosis and producing more metabolic water, which is really great, because over time we could slowly start diluting the level of deuterium in our bodies and reducing it. That means then we can start healing those mitochondria. And as we heal the mitochondria, our energy levels will start rising, and our NAD levels will naturally rise and our CD38 will naturally drop, which is the way we want to do it. This is the natural way of doing it, not these artificial things that can sort of derange systems and put you at risk, So we know quite clearly from research, unfortunately, we don't have in vivo, that means in humans, because you can't experiment on cancer patients, which is, you just can't. So we have to do these other experiments, and these other experiments, whether they're rat experiments or whatever, what they show is that when you increase in a cancerous state NAD, you basically allow cancer cells to survive and go metastatic. If you reduce the levels, you actually suppress the growth of these. So it's quite clear in that regard, but we don't have the human studies. But the mechanisms are there, quite clear. They've been identified in the literature, both in vitro, which is petri dish, and in a number of animal models. That's all we've got, unfortunately. But the thing is, I think that it's quite clear it is in a diverse type of animal models, not just rats, which indicates to me that these pathways are identical in all mammals. So, NAD and mitochondria, the way they work, is really ancient in the early cells. It's identical. There's no change, no difference. The machinery and all that is no different. So because it's no different, it works the same way. Your hormones and diets may be different between animals, but fundamentally the way energy is produced is the same in all species. It's pretty much oxidative phosphorylation. It's producing ATP. Simple as that. So those are concerns that I have with the way people like David Sinclair and other longevity people tend to use this reductionist approach to promote these longevity things without taking into consideration people's state, in particular in the modern era, where people have got a lot of senescence, they've got a lot of damaged cells, and they are much more vulnerable to cancer and things like that than in the past. So in the past, in a healthier body, giving some extra niacin or some extra NMN, NMN, or NR, which is the other supplement, may have been fine, less of a risk, because those people would have had much lower levels of CD38 and senescent cells. But nowadays, that's not the case. Now the level of, problems we have to approach healing in a very different way. The approach isn't, take all these supplements and you'll live long. Not necessarily. There are a whole lot of issues, and really, and that's reductionist thinking. Yes, we do need NAD for energy production, but the body can, has this ability to cycle these things. I mean, even there, the salvage pathway to salvage these metabolites. So the body can do it. So giving it extra, is it a good idea? I think that not, just because it works on a rat that's healthy, and you give it more, and it lives a less amount of time, you literally have to induce cancer in the damn rats with other methods because they don't live long enough to really get a lot of these things. I mean, even the ones in New York that are getting diabetes by eating junk food of people's, even they are not succumbing to cancer. So they usually die before that happens because their metabolic rate is so high they only live for a couple of years. So it's not the same thing. You're not going to get the same results where we're living for many decades, sustaining after decade, sustaining a lot of cellular senescence and mitochondrial damage due to mitochondrial damage. And so you can't compare the humans with those sort of short-lived animal models. And that's, and I think he's missing some of the risks associated with the recommended stuff that he's doing, both in terms of long-term use of metformin and a number of the actual, and in particular, in a society that doesn't consume a lot of red meat and B12, and the importance to basically maintain a good brain, what is he trying to do? A long-lived dementia patient? It's not much quality of life in that, David. So, I mean, I think he needs to realize his place, that he's a reductionist researcher, and stop going out there and telling people how to live long when he himself, doesn't have the full picture. And he's putting some people at risk. And not everybody's doing like what he's doing and his dad, time restricted feeding and all these other things, which have improvements in cellular function, improve insulin sensitivity, and all these other things. So he needs to be very careful with this sort of stuff. When you're recommending things for a general public, I'm very restrictive, and I always say that this, primarily I focus on the species appropriate way of living and eating. And when people do come to me, because some people do come to me who may have a vegetarian background or all that, I do encourage them to modify that, because you sort of can do a more animal-based vegetarian diet. I mean, like even those Loma Linda people doing like 50% dairy, and then some eggs, and then some other animal foods, like especially seafood or whatever. They were nearly doing 60 or 2/3. So it was nearly, you could call it animal-based vegetarianism back then in the 50s, based on the stuff that even Gundry, he saw the food stuff that they were actually, what they were feeding people, what they were recommending back then. I mean, nowadays it may have changed because you've got a whole lot of other crackpots, and I wonder why they don't do any studies with those people anymore. You don't really get, like 2,000 Loma Linda people living. No, you don't get, because a lot of them have got diabetes and all sorts of things like the rest of the society, because they've gone more plant-based. That's why they've taken out a lot of those animal foods. And that's the problem with his approach. Let's supplement and ignore the dietary side. The dietary side is very important if you want to maintain good mitochondrial function into old age, because that is going to guarantee you longevity, not some pill in a bottle. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. It's bit of a long-winded way, but it needed to be covered, because a lot of people think that this guy's the longevity guru that's going to save everyone and make everyone live for more than over 100 years of age. No. If you're neglecting important things in the body, you may end up causing more grief and putting people at risk for all sorts of things, both deficiencies and other risks, especially in the current food environment and the current risk environment, health risk environment. People are much more damaged than what they used to be even a decade ago, and they're getting more damaged. And that's why those statistics are getting what they're projecting are getting worse. And now we're trying to go 100% kibble, 100% high deuterium, basically. Even the meats replacements are all with seed oils in them and stuff like that. And we know how many parts per million they have. Well, up to 255 parts per million. We're talking about double that of sugar. So we're talking about a lot of mitochondrial damage. This is why they're saying 1 in 3 Americans will get cancer. It's a mitochondria, you're damaging your mitochondria with so much deuterium in the food supply. What do you expect? NAD's not going to save you. Neither is metformin. They'll just cause more deficiencies and other issues. So it's just, yeah. Anyway, he's another just reductionist, pseudoscientist, unfortunately. He's a scientist that basically has this very narrow way of looking at research and looking at this field of research in particular. That doesn't mean that, some of the stuff that he's uncovered where you can alter certain genes in a certain way and actually reverse age and stuff like that. But there are risks of cancer doing that. They know it, and they're trying to find a way to mitigate all that. So I'm not saying he's a dumb person, no, in that, but he's a reductionist crackpot in a sense that he views the world in this very reductionist way. And that's dangerous especially in the current food environment, because he's not taking these other things, the nutrition part, into account with his recommendations. I don't call his research crackpot. That's pretty good research that he does. It's mechanistic in some cases, and it's animal-based, obviously. You can't do those sort of experiments on humans. And it's also research looking at the steps. But he's not a nutritionist. He's not a physician. He doesn't have any of these expertise. And he's recommending stuff without considering diet or medical pharmaceutical interactions, the pharmacokinetics of those things that he's actually recommending. And that's why I've got a lot of concern, because he's being influenced by other crackpots in other fields. And, sometimes you're in a science field, you think that everybody else in other science fields are doing the same thing. It's not necessarily the case. Some people that are doing hardcore biochemistry or looking at, this in a reductionist way, that sort of research, they are more purist in the way they do their work. But nutritionists aren't. We know what crackpots, it's all associated garbage. And the problem is he takes it at face value, because he says, oh, that's just another expert. Well, no, that's a crackpot. And when you take that at face value, you become a crackpot as well, David, because you start recommending things that crackpots are recommending and promoting. You're not promoting a species appropriate diet, but a crackpot diet that these other people are recommending. Stick to what you're good at, which is, reductionist biochemistry and, sort of experiments of that sort. That's where you're pretty good at, and some of the genetics and stuff like that. But when it comes to dietary stuff, you're not trained in that area. You've got no idea about what a species appropriate diet is. Maybe if you check the archaeology and looked at the N15 data, you'd probably get an insight and realize that you're completely off the mark on those things. And this is the problem when, you get ex-physicists or ex-Nobel Prize winners that actually come into another field and think, I'm going to be the perfect expert, when they have got no idea, and they just jump on the bandwagon and they think they've they've got everything, and then they just push it like mad, and they use their "I'm a Nobel Prize winner" or "I'm a great researcher," and so I'll push this sort of diet or that sort of stuff, and you go, well, ooh, hold on, have you really looked at the research carefully? Have you are you are you trained in statistics to understand how to read these nutritional studies? Because what you do doesn't require that sort of training, that sort of mechanistic stuff that you do. And so that's where I think some of these people get into trouble. It's a bit like the doctors that never get trained in nutrition, and they think they're nutritionists, and they've got no idea how to even read the nutritional studies. I can read them better than they have. That's how funny it is. It's just ridiculous. And I mean, Bart points them out all the time, how ridiculous they are. But that's the situation that we find ourselves, that a lot of people, um, follow the expert opinion and don't question things. But anyway, that's pretty much it anyway, guys. See yous.